In this story, I'll be referring to myself as Katie. The story was extremely embarrassing for me for the longest time, but I finally feel the courage to share it with you all. This happened in June of last year in 2023. I came into my part-time job at the local salon. Being a senior in high school, I needed to save up some money for college, and working at the salon was the perfect opportunity. As I entered the salon, I clocked in and greeted my coworkers with a smile, and I made my way to the front desk to check my schedule for the day. Just then, the door chimed, and an older man walked in. He was tall and he had a neatly trimmed beard, but what caught my attention was his piercing blue eyes. They seemed to look right through me. "Good morning. How can I help you?" I asked with a smile. "I'm here for a grooming session," he replied, flashing me a charming smile. "Of course, let me check our schedule," I said, trying to maintain a professional demeanor. "May I have your name, please?" "It's Max," he said, extending his hand for a handshake. "Nice to meet you, Max. I'm Katie," I said, shaking his hand briefly before checking the schedule. "So, it looks like we have an opening in about 30 minutes. Would you like to come back then?" "That would be perfect," he said. I quickly made the appointment and went back to my work at the front desk. Despite his charming demeanor, there was something about Max that made me feel uneasy, but I just pushed those thoughts aside and went on with my day. As the time for Max's appointment approached, I saw him waiting outside the salon. He smiled at me as I opened the door for him and followed me back to the grooming area. My coworker, who I'll refer to as Lisa, greeted him and started the grooming process, while I went back to my duties at the front desk. But I couldn't seem to shake off the feeling that Max was watching me. I tried to focus on my work, but his gaze made me uncomfortable. I decided to ignore it and just went about my tasks, hoping that he would leave soon. But to my dismay, he didn't. As his grooming session ended, Max unexpectedly came up to the front desk and he asked me for my number. I was taken aback by this, and I politely declined. I barely knew this guy, and I was already feeling uneasy around him. But he wouldn't take no for an answer. He started to make crude comments about my appearance, since I am what most would consider to be physically attractive. I was taken aback and I didn't know what to do. Before I could say anything, this guy grabbed my hand and pulled me towards him, saying he would give me a large tip if I went out with him. In a panic, I shouted for my manager and Lisa to come help me, but Max didn't seem to care. He continued to hold onto my hand and started to pull me towards the back of the salon. I knew that I had to do something to get out of his grip. In a panicked state, I felt a rumbling in my stomach and I began feeling extremely nauseated. At that moment, I then released a loud fart. Now, this may sound humorous to you, but this was a terrifying situation for me, and I didn't have a whole lot of options since I was at work and I didn't really know any good self-defense tactics. I had always been known for my loud and embarrassing farts because I suffer from a condition called IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome. However, I had never thought I could use this to my advantage. I took a deep breath and let out a loud and forceful fart right on Max's face. He was taken aback and immediately let go of my hand. In that moment, I ran towards the door, my heart beating like a drum. I could hear Max shouting behind me, but I didn't turn back. I ran out to the front of the store, not even caring that people were staring at me. I didn't stop until I reached a safe distance. Max was nowhere in sight, and I just let out a sigh of relief. I had never been more grateful for my embarrassing trait. It had really saved me from a potentially dangerous situation. I went back to the front desk and my manager had Max leave and then banned him from the establishment. I looked around the store for Max, but he was already long gone. As I recounted the whole incident to my coworkers, I couldn't help but feel proud of myself, but also a bit embarrassed. I had stood up to Max and escaped from his clutches using my own unique way. It taught me to trust my instincts and to not be afraid to use my strengths. But to me, it was a reminder that no matter how embarrassing or unusual our traits may seem, They're always a part of us and can even save us in unexpected situations. To Max, I really hope that I never see you again. I thank my condition for saving me from whatever you had planned for me that day. When I was in college, I used to work the front desk at a local gym. It was typically a very routine job. After about 7 p.m., it would get quiet. My usual shift was the closing shift, which was 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. Beginning at 9, I would begin the process of shutting down the gym, as usually by 9, the gym would start emptying out. On Fridays from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. was teen gym night. This meant that teenagers 13 to 17 could have access to the basketball courts. On this night, about 15 to 20 teenagers were playing in the gym. The strange event started at about 9:30 p.m. I was counting down the cash in the register and filling out forms when I saw 2 older teenagers enter the gym. On my initial glance, I thought nothing of it, as it was team gym night. I figured that maybe these 2 teen boys had forgotten something in the gym and were headed back to get it. But on a second glance, I had noticed the 2 whispering to each other, and they kept looking back at me as they were whispering to each other. They were also wearing jeans, which made me think that they probably were not in the gym before. The 2 also did not present a key tag to scan in, and they walked right past me. I immediately got the feeling that something was off. One of the trainers was coming down the stairs as the 2 had passed me, and he had also noticed the same odd behavior. The 2 began to head towards the back of the gym. They didn't use any of the equipment. They just went to the back and just continued to whisper to each other. The trainer started following them. A few minutes later, the boys and the trainer started walking back towards my desk. The boys once again were whispering and looking at me. Then the 2 exited the gym. The trainer then came up to me and was like, "Those 2 were pretty off, don't you think?" I felt relieved when he said this, now knowing that it wasn't just me overthinking it. I told him that I thought so too. He then explained that he followed them and pretended to shut stuff down so they would think he was just doing his job, when in reality he was keeping an eye on them. A few minutes after 10, we walked out of the gym and then locked the doors. We noticed a small blue car parked in the parking lot, and sure enough, it was those same 2 teenagers. So the trainer and I waited by the front door until the 2 drove away. Ultimately, nothing actually happened. I often wonder what the trainer and I may have prevented from happening that night, and what those 2 were actually up to and what they were planning. This happened a few weeks ago, but it still sticks with me and makes me double check all of the logs. On September 2nd, 2024, I was working an overnight security gig. I've been a guard for about 15 years, and other than getting into brawls at nightclubs, I've had a pretty easy career, minus some contractor crap that I did in Central America. The night started the same way they always do. I had gotten off my first gig and went to relieve the normal night guard, who we'll refer to as D from here on out. I arrive and D looks frazzled. He's an old martial arts guy that works the apartment job for the same reason I do, half off the rent. I walk in and I ask him what's up. He says he encountered a guy by the gate and, I quote, gave him the heebie-jeebies. He asked if I would go back to my apartment and grab my Kerri firearm. I hesitantly agreed because, having worked in this industry long enough, guns rarely lead to good outcomes, but D is scared green, so I agree. I go back and grab not only the gun, but my dog, a 120-pound Anatolian Shepherd. I suit her up in her harness and grab her QD muzzle. On the off chance that something goes down, I'd rather have the dog ready to go. I arrive, and D is elated to get the hell out of Dodge, gives the dog her standard good girl chicken strip, and takes off back to his apartment. I attach my dog's leash to my waist and we go on patrol. I live in Texas, and our apartments are sealed by gates that you have to have the code for. I go to check the first gate and immediately come into contact with the same person that D was so worried about. It's 93 degrees out, but this dude is wearing a damn trench coat with a hood, and before we even get near him, the dog starts going ballistic, hackles up in between my legs, snarling like some sort of feral monstrosity. I give her the command to chill, and she does. But what bothers me is that the dude doesn't even flinch. Most people see a dog that big barking and snarling and insist upon being no part of whatever it is the dog is protecting, in this case me. At this point, I step forward and initiate contact. "Hey buddy, how we doing tonight? You alright?" The man turns to face me, and at this point I see that he's horribly disfigured. One eye missing but sealed up from surgery, the other a brilliant blue, and a horrible scarring on the side of the face missing the eye. "Yeah, I'm fine." He responds rather quietly, sort of in the way a child who's trying to fix something on their own might respond. "So, do you live here? I haven't seen you around. My name is H. You new in town, or has anybody ever told you that you have incredible eyes?" This simple statement made my blood run ice cold. At this point, I tap the QD on the muzzle, and it swings out of the way. I'd like to think my mother used to tell me that, but I can't say it's something I hear often. "Listen, man, you gotta get moving. If you don't live here, I can't have you standing out here." At this point, he sort of goes rigid and reaches in his pocket, but I don't give him the chance to do much more as I draw my weapon at this point. "Hey man, you gotta leave. I'm not telling you again. I don't know where the hell you're from, but it ain't from around here. Last chance. Screw off." At this point, he sort of slowly removes his hand from his pocket, and he's holding this little 35mm disposable. He lifts it, snaps a photo, then says, "Have a good evening. Your eyes truly are beautiful." And then off he goes. About 5 minutes later, I'm still shaking up when the cops arrived. It turns out one of the apartments close to the gate heard the dog going nuts and heard me raise my voice to our oddball friend, and they called the cops. They tell me they'll up the patrols, but that they hadn't gotten any other calls about the dude. This event happened in 2018. I worked at SeaTac Airport, which I still think is probably the smallest international airport I have ever seen. The airport was so small that your workstation almost forces you to work alongside with other jobs. In this case, I worked in sales, and we were stationed next to the wheelchair lane, which usually had one wheelchair pusher in the lane. Now keep in mind, I was only 19 when this incident happened. I would say I'm a sweet person who goes out of my way to start conversations with people that look bored. Since I worked the night shift at the airport, there was practically nobody flying, and there would be more workers than passengers. Therefore, we meet Mike, around the age of 20 to 23. Mike was one of the wheelchair pushers who looked completely out of it, zoned out, and didn't seem non-talkative. Me and Mike worked side by side in lanes. He would usually come to give the person in the wheelchair lane a lunch break, and then proceeded to go back to pushing people in the wheelchairs throughout the airport. The 30 minutes we saw each other every day was completely awkward and quiet, until one day he overheard me and my coworkers talking about depression. He prompted up his chair and goes, "Yeah, I agree with you. Depression sucks." That's when I realized, oh man, the kid doesn't just look depressed, he probably is. Now, I didn't know how that small interaction changed our perspective on Mike. He would join our conversation and even went out of his way to say hello and give us a hug when he finds us throughout the airport. One day my lead suggested that me and Mike should go out for tacos, since we both kept complaining how nothing opens late at night and how we're always hungry. Now, we've known Mike for almost a month at this point, and his depressed-filled body started filling with joy every time we would find out we were stationed next to each other. At this rate, we laughed it off, saying no way, it would be too weird if we went alone together. I was currently single and was no way attracted or interested in Mike like that. He then looked at me saying, "I actually know this amazing Mexican spot that's nearby if you're actually really hungry. They serve the best fish tacos." Now, the fatty I am, I didn't decline. I loved eating late at night, and Mike never gave me stranger danger vibes. I agree because I didn't really see the harm going out to get tacos before I sleep. We exchanged our numbers and I headed home before him since I clocked out an hour before he did. Now, when I arrived home, I was getting dressed to go out to eat, and the plan was to just meet up at the spot, since the Mexican spot ended up only being 5 minutes away from my house. I got a text from Mike saying he wanted to pick me up. I kept refusing because I just finally got my driver's license, and the place was only 5 minutes away from my home. After almost 40 minutes of us insisting how we're going to get there, I finally gave in to have him pick me up, which I would later regret. Now, I was a big girl, like I was in the 200 zone compared to Mike, who was very thin and short, so I wasn't really worried if he attempted anything with me. I told him to pick me up along a street down because I didn't really want him to know where I exactly lived just yet. His beat-up trashy Toyota pulls up and we head to the Mexican spot. We get our food and it was so amazing that we went for seconds, and we had a really good talk watching the soap opera on the TV. After we were done, we get back into his car where he was supposed to drop me off back at home, but he stopped. He then looks at me and says, "Can we talk in private? I know a spot." I kindly refused and I told him that it's already 2 a.m. and that we should really get back home, and he says, "I know it's late, but I just have a lot going on in my life, and you're the only person that's really hung out with me like this." The kind of idiot I am, I said sure. Already seeing him drive down the road, I noticed so many red flags. As the streetlights start disappearing more, his mood and tone starts to change. A complete difference in the atmosphere around Mike emerges. He starts telling me, "I sure do hate the society about women nowadays. They all have this stupid standard. I hate them. I hate them." And I'm just like, did I just find a woman hater? Mike never rubbed me off as a gay guy. He's starting to state how every time he attempts to talk to women, they blatantly reject him. And I, a woman, is now a dummy that he's projecting all his female hate talk to. I was actually too stunned to speak because he became a whole different person during the drive. We arrive at an abandoned skate park in the middle of God knows where, and he tells me to get out. I listened, and here we are at 2 a.m. sitting on cold concrete and freezing temperatures. He goes on to tell me how he hates women, and how he would lie to his passengers that he takes on wheelchairs and tell them he's from the UK and speaks in a British accent. I was so overwhelmed, like what the hell was happening right now? He then talks to me in a British accent from there on, saying how he would give his life up for God, and how God was the only thing keeping him chained down. He looks me dead in the eyes and then says, "God would want me to castrate myself since he doesn't want me touching or near a female creature for my safety." I was completely quiet the whole time, really confused, questioning myself how much of a fool I was to even think that I thought this guy liked me. I was completely wrong. After 30 minutes, I was getting cold since this female creature I was anemic. I told him I would like to go home now, and he then says, "No." And he proceeds to talk in a British accent about how God is coming to rescue him. I felt like I was in a movie because I just can't believe what was even happening. After he noticed that I started checking my leg, he then says, "I guess we can proceed back to the car." We go back to his car and a miracle happens. My Asian mother calls me. I was expecting her to scream at me, asking me where I was and to come home like she usually does. But this time she just says in a calm voice, "Where are you?" In Vietnamese, I tell her I'm out getting food with a coworker, and she just says, "Okay, have fun," then hangs up. Again in disbelief that she didn't even care where I was at almost 3 a.m., and for the first time I then lie and say, "What? Oh, you want me to come home? Oh, okay, I'll start heading home soon," and I pretend to hang up the phone. I look at Mike and then say, "Sorry, but my mom wants me to come home now." He punches his wheels and sighs annoyingly loud, which gave me a bit of a jump scare for a moment, and he then starts his car and just sits there in silence, annoyed, grinning the whole time. He eventually starts driving, pulls out his phone, and literally throws it at me. "Open it," he says. Already exhausted and still not believing everything that was happening, my eyes grew fixated at over the 100 notes on his phone. "What is this?" I asked. He says it's songs and poems that he wrote. He then looks at me and says, "Go ahead, pick one." I don't quite remember what the note said. The only keywords I saw were betrayal and woman. That stood out to me. He goes, "That one. Would you like for me to sing it to you?" I straight up said no, and he continued to sing it for me. And the worst part is he sings it in a British accent. The whole drive was him singing to me in a British accent how God's plan is to stray him from the human race so he can overcome himself. I was zoned out the whole car trip. It all didn't feel real. My sense of danger gets lower due to how exhausted I was and how I was listening to how this man wanted to eradicate the female species off the face of Earth and how our judgment day was coming. He dropped me off on my street and had the audacity to say, "I had such a lovely time with you, darling." I just slammed his door shut and ran down my street before he had a chance to start up his car. After that incident, I ignored his messages, which he texted me 2 pages long on how he's sorry and how he believes God was here to put us together, how my Asianness was the only thing holding him back to committing real love to me. I stood in the back of my station to avoid talking to him. He would follow me back to my break room, and thankfully my manager was there and yelled at him to piss off before he called security. He later got the hint that I was not interested, but he would continue to stare me down every second that he had the same station with me. Thankfully, during that time, I had found a second job, and my whole schedule was changed, and I never had to see him at work again. I saw him at Target once, but quickly ran back to my car before he had the chance to walk up to me. I later found out that Mike was living with one of my lesbian coworkers. He was sleeping on her couch. I told her everything he said and did, and she was completely shocked. She never saw Mike like that. He was just very quiet and would just crack a joke here and there. I advised her she should keep a close eye on him. She thanked me for relaying all the information, and eventually he was forced to move out later in the month. This event took place in 2015, just a few months after my 21st birthday. For context, I'm a female. I was working at a bank, and it was my last shift before my vacation that I was so excited for. I was only scheduled for a 4-hour shift, and I was eager to leave and get my nails done and pack. I worked as a bank teller. For context, there's an area where the bank tellers work that is surrounded by bulletproof glass, and there are desks out in the open where people open accounts, etc. I was at my desk when a man completely covered in a burqa approached my station. My coworker immediately sensed that something was off and then walked away to an area where you can't be seen. I have no idea why she walked away and greeted the customer and asked how I could help him. He then slid me a note without saying a word. I reached for the note and my heart felt like it stopped. It read, "You have 10 seconds to give me $30,000. I have a bomb strapped to my chest and I will kill us all." Time stopped at that moment. I knew at that moment there was a chance I was going to die. I had to listen because my coworkers were right there out in the open. He could take them hostage, and there was no chance I was risking my life over some money. I signaled him, "One moment," as I frantically opened my drawer and threw whatever I could at him and prayed that he would leave. I knew it was a he because I could tell by his tall and skinny structure. He was wearing these black glasses, and all you could see were his lifeless eyes. I frantically gave him everything in my drawer, and I was panicking because I had nowhere near $30K in my drawer, so I was convinced my life would end. Thank goodness he walked away and left the building. As soon as he left, I lost it. I cried like a baby. I ran into my manager's arms, and she used the panic button, which alerts the police to come to the bank. I was a mess. My life flashed before my eyes. All I could think of was my family, my husband, everything. I waited for the cops to come, and I had to give a statement. They assured me that he probably didn't have a bomb, but that didn't make things any better. After the statement, we had to wait for a crisis team to come talk to us. I just wanted to leave. I wanted to go home. I would have already been home if it wasn't for this. My coworkers joked that I should take along with the crisis team because we could close for the rest of the day. How selfish are you? I'm a mess and you're thinking about not working? Anyway, they came and I spoke with someone. I finally could leave and go home. I went on vacation a few days later, and I didn't realize that my life changed forever. I became paranoid. I was scared to do anything. I didn't want to go on rides anymore. I was scared of driving. I thought about death a lot and developed a panic disorder. I was convinced that everything was a threat, and it ultimately really took a toll on my life and relationships. For years I suffered because of PTSD. I was terrified of banks, and sadly of people in burqas, which is really awful because it's not their fault. I felt like a bad person. I had panic attacks to the point that I thought I was dying. Heart palpitations all the time, impending doom. I eventually got help and therapy, and I'm on medications now. I am doing better overall, but I'll carry this mental disorder for the rest of my life. Not to mention, I was already diagnosed with OCD before all of this. I have an amazing support system from my family, friends, and husband. They never caught the guy, and right after that, the bank took security way more seriously. They hired a guard and installed way more cameras. A few weeks later, I quit, and I found a new job in the medical field. Now I'm a CMA. This experience may not seem too bad, but for me, it was absolutely terrifying and life-changing. For the man who robbed the bank that day, I really hope you're happy with the $6,000 that you got from the bank that day. I hope it was worth it for ruining my life forever. Screw you. So I work at a local pharmacy on the rougher end of my small hometown. About a week ago, I was at work filling prescriptions per usual. All of a sudden, 5 undercover cops pull a vehicle over in our drive-thru. When the individuals inside the vehicle stepped out, we immediately knew it was a drug bust. There were 3 of them, 1 woman with 2 men, and they were all deathly skinny with sunken eyes and little to no teeth. Immediately, the cops start patting them all down for drugs. We assumed they caught them dropping off some drugs after a sale, and then followed them until they could find a place to pull them over. The woman and one of the men are immediately excused after their first pat down, and they wait patiently for their friend who had been driving. He was covered face to ankles in tattoos, and he was wearing nothing but basketball shorts and shoes. Understandable, I guess, as it was about 101 degrees in southeastern Tennessee when this happened. The cops keep saying that there's something in his shorts and asking him to remove them. The man became angry, then argued that it was all him, and then shot a frenzy of homophobic slurs towards the officer. This goes on for about 30 minutes, all of my coworkers just watching. Eventually, they end up clearing him, and he goes to join his friends in the parking lot of the store right behind our drive-thru. Eager to hear what happened, we went outside and offered bottles of water to the remaining officers just because it was so hot. They then apologized for backing up our drive-thru, and as I looked up, I saw the tattooed man staring at my coworker and I. I have never seen a more evil look in another human being's eyes. I guess he thought we betrayed him by offering the officers water somehow? I don't know. He motioned his finger across his neck, like the stereotypical movie style. It sent chills down my spine despite the 101-degree heat. That was a few weeks ago, and I keep seeing him whenever I leave for work, just staring from afar. My boss is aware and carries, and he always escorts me to my car, but I hope this druggie gives up soon and leaves me alone. To start out, I'm just going to say that I'm an 18-year-old female. and this is from my 70-year-old grandma's perspective. This happened a couple of years ago in a small town southwest of British Columbia. It has about 10,000 people, and everyone knows each other. Now to the actual story. It was a pretty normal night. I was working the night shift at my job as a jail guard when a man approached me calmly. This wasn't anything out of the ordinary. We have our share of homeless people and such wandering out late at night, which gave me no red flags at the beginning. Then he asked, "I need help," in a deep monotone voice. I looked at him and now began to see that he had blood all over his clothes. I immediately asked him, Sir, are you okay? Are you hurt?" All he did was look at me with no soul in his eyes. Nothing, like he felt no pain. Maybe it was shock? "I just need help. Get an officer, please. I need to tell them something," he said. I was at this point just very confused, but I thought that I'd better listen to him. Who knows who this man even is and what he's capable of? I rush to get a fellow officer, and he brings the man into a room where they can privately talk, and I go back to my job, now realizing that the man had parked a dark red old Ford across the street. Fast forward to my shift being almost over, when one of my coworkers tells me the full story. Apparently the man had a saw hammering kitchen knife covered in blood in his truck, and he had confessed to decapitating his uncle and only getting halfway through his aunts when he finally gave up and confessed. I am so thankful that my grandma was okay, because if she didn't listen or he got angry, who knows what would have happened to her or someone else. Always be aware of your surroundings and never trust a stranger. I'm a female, and at the time of this story I was 22 years old. I was working unhappily at a dental surgery, and I was in the process of applying for different jobs. I have never known what I wanted to do for my career, so my career search was a bit random. At the dental practice, I would work late nights on reception on a Wednesday. One Wednesday night, I had just seen the last male patient out, and I began to shut down the practice by closing the shutters and locking the patient entrance. When I had already shut down the practice and locked the door, I had heard a knock on the staff entrance door, and a man's voice then said, "Hello? I can see you. Can you open the door?" I tried to look through the shutters, but I couldn't see anyone. I assumed it was the same man whom I just let out of the surgery. Maybe he had forgotten his card or needed to use the bathroom or something. So I went to the staff entrance, which was also at the front of the building. I opened the door ajar and saw a middle-aged, creepy-looking man staring at me through the gap of the door. I had never seen this man before in my life. Before I could even say anything, he then said, "Oh, hello. Can I come in?" I then replied with, "No, we're closed now. Can I help you?" Although I was feeling unnerved, I tried to stay professional in case he was looking to join the practice as a new patient. He said, "I've been driving past the dental surgery for a while. I always look in and see you. I think you're beautiful and I would love to take you out." My heart started racing. Although I was 22, I'm always told that I look very young for my age. The man was very clearly a lot older than me, and at this point I started to feel really anxious and uncomfortable. I replied by saying, "I'm sorry, I wouldn't be allowed to accept that offer. Thank you anyway." He seemed upset by this and began to move closer to the door, then saying, "What's your name?" I didn't think fast enough to use a fake name, and I gave him my real name. He then said, "That's a nice name. I'm Jay, nice to meet you, and I'll be seeing you very soon." And then he walked away. Luckily, I wasn't alone at the practice, and my colleagues were in the surgery office cleaning up for the day. I rushed and told them about the situation because I was really shaken up by it. It almost felt like a threat. My boss has CCTV, and he checked it over and saw his registration plate, then sent it to me so I could keep a note of it. My other colleague walked me to my car every day for about a week as I was so scared of seeing this man again. A week passed and I had not seen this man again. I had been going to a couple of job interviews, and I had another one which I applied for a few weeks ago on the following Monday. It was for a receptionist position locally again. My mom dropped me off as I was unsure of the parking situation. When we arrived, I really felt uneasy, as the office just looked like a house and was secluded and quiet. I walked up to the address and rang the doorbell. I heard someone coming down the stairs approaching the door, and to my horror, it was Jay, the same man who had turned up to my work the previous week. He said, "See? I told you I'd be seeing you again. It's fate." Before I even entered the building, I quickly turned back and called my mom to come get me straight away. Luckily, he wasn't following me. I told my mom and she said that he would have all my details due to them being on my CV. I realized that he would have been able to see my current place of employment when I applied. That's how he knew where I worked and turned up there. Luckily, I didn't have my address on my CV, but I did have my number and email. Just about 30 minutes from leaving the building, I had 2 missed calls and an email from him offering me the job, although I hadn't even had an interview or even entered the house at all. I blocked his email and his number straight away. I even changed my phone number too, as the emails didn't stop. They kept on saying that I don't want to miss the opportunity and how I'd be on fantastic money. I reported the job position and let the authorities know. I do not like to think what would have happened if I entered the office, and I still get anxious now even as I work at the same place. I still get my colleagues to walk me to my car. I've never seen him again, and I never want to. Stay safe out there, people. When I was fresh out of high school, I was working at a nursing home. I had the early shift, so I had to leave my house at about 4 in the morning. Every morning there was a red car following me after I pulled out of my driveway, but I didn't think anything of it at first. Then I realized it was following me home every afternoon as well. After the second week, I started to get paranoid, and I mentioned something to my best friend at the time. She assured me that I shouldn't be worried. When I got a job at a daycare, I figured the following would stop. I was wrong. My shift was 3 p.m. to 12 a.m. I had one little girl after 6, and I was in charge of cleaning the building after everyone left. I noticed that the car still followed me to work every day, but not home. One of the kids in my class had a dad that would pick him up sometimes, and he was always kinda flirty. I never thought anything until I saw him get into a little red car. Then I got weirded out. I carried on with my daily routine. One night, my boss and her husband came in and they asked if someone was waiting for me. I was confused and said no. They explained they were driving by on their way home and that they saw a man sitting on the trunk of my car. They waited until I was finished cleaning, and the little girl was gone and walked me to my car. The man was gone. The following finally stopped after that. I was happy until I got a piece of paper in my mailbox. No postage or anything. It said that I owed child support and needed to meet my lawyer at an address. I've never had any kids. To this day, I still don't understand who the person was or what the heck was going on. But yeah, it was a really weird time in my life. I usually get over creepy encounters fairly quick, but this one was quite different from the rest. I go by the rule, be nice to everyone, because you never know who could be a secret serial killer, and that has worked out well for me majority of the time. Although this time, it was probably what got me into that situation. When I was 18, I worked as a lifeguard by a small pool. Nothing fancy. I was basically just a babysitter to all ages. When adults got bored looking after their kids, they sometimes sought me out for some reason, to have a free therapy session, I guess. Mothers and fathers talking about their hardships. I know I worked as a lifeguard, but I can't save that kind of life. One day, a 50-year-old man with his 2 kids came to the pool. As many other people did, he went up to me and we started talking. It started with some small talk, like how he didn't let his children eat ketchup because it has the properties to remove even rust from metals. But as the hours went by, he started talking badly about one of his kids, how she was overweight, had anger issues, and was worried about boys when no one would even look at her. I'm not gonna lie, that last statement made me go quiet, and I tried to somewhat reason with him to not speak like that about his daughter. He seemed to listen to what I had to say, so I was happy that I could possibly help this kid in some kind of way. Having a parent like that would have given anyone a hard time. The next day, he came back extremely happy, telling me that I was so good with kids because my talk apparently helped him. He then began the day by trash-talking his ex-wife to oblivion, like how she had the most custody over their kids and that the kids only ate fast food at her house. I didn't say much because I felt like it wasn't my place to speak, and I didn't want to create unnecessary drama in my workplace. But what set the first red flag in motion was when the conversation suddenly shifted into him wanting a young wife. It was as if he had tried to trash talk his ex-wife to get me to understand that he was single and interested in a relationship with me. The days went by, and he continued to visit the pool every day. To some extent, I had the feeling that he now came every day just to see me. I was fairly creeped out by this thought, so I tried to ignore it and just do my work. As the days passed, he had started asking more and more personal questions, like, "Where do you usually go grocery shopping? Is there a cafe close to where you live?" As I was fairly sure that he was trying to figure out where I lived, I kindly deflected all of his questions with something very obscure. During my last work week, I had an afternoon shift. I asked my colleague who had the morning shift if anything had happened that day that I should be aware of. He told me that they had to ban a man from entering the pool area because he had reached behind the counter at the small pool shop where the workers keep their personal belongings. Apparently, he had been denied by my coworker to get a look at our work calendar, so he had tried to get a glance at it in a more illegal manner. That last week, I saw him twice at the end of my shifts, standing near the pool entrance. The second time I saw him there, I reported him to the pool security guards, and after that, I never saw him again. I was 19 years old and the only female working at a shop specializing in automotive batteries and things of that nature. I had been working there long enough to realize that most of the clientele was male, and oftentimes really made for some awkward situations. For instance, I would get talked down to and patronized quite a bit or flirted with to the point where I would be somewhat uncomfortable. I have really thick skin though, so either way I typically wasn't that bothered. One day during a particularly busy rush, a very tall and well-built man who was maybe in his mid-30s came through my line. I consider myself to be pretty good at reading people, and this guy had some very, very strange energy. He seemed a little off. However, it was my job to be professional and assist whoever came through my line. I brushed aside the uneasy feelings. I just wanted to ring this guy out and get through the rest of the line that was now trailing out the front door. I greeted him and talked to him as I would any other customer while I was processing his transaction. Things were going fine until he realized I was almost done. He started stalling, making up weird excuses as to why he couldn't use certain credit cards, how he needed me to put his battery on hold and he would be back, etc. I told him I would hold it for him and that he could come back whenever he found the time. I figured he would leave at that point, but he just stood there and stared at me. Now that I think about it, he was staring more through me than at me. I was a bit uneasy but kept my polite professional demeanor. "Sir, if you're not purchasing anything at the moment, may I ask that you step aside so I can assist the other customers?" I said. He completely disregarded my question, and in a low raspy voice then asked, "So what's your name?" I didn't wear a name tag specifically for reasons like this. I've had customers find me on Facebook before, and it was really unsettling. So thinking quickly, I threw out my nickname. "It's Rhea." "Rhea," he said as he kept staring. I just smiled awkwardly and then said, "Yep, that's me." By this point, my manager had realized what was going on, and he proceeded to ask the man to step aside as well. After hearing it from my manager, the man then walked to a corner of the store by some shelving and continued to stare while I was ringing the rest of the customers out. A bit of time went by, and the line had cleared up, but he was still standing there staring, and he was now smiling with the most sickening smile I think I've ever seen. It made my skin crawl. Of course, my manager and coworker saw this too, and my coworker grabbed my arm and then said, "Come on, dude, let's go out back." As we were walking to the stock room, my manager asked the man if there was anything else he needed. The man muttered that there wasn't, and then left. I really wished that was the end of it. But of course, he had to come back in to purchase the battery. When he came back the next day, we again had a line. He let people go ahead of him and waited until I was free before coming up to the counter to make his purchase. I greeted him again and tried to remain professional, but it was hard considering how creeped out I was. I was again met with the same stare and the same freaky smile. I can't really remember the entire conversation, but at one point the questions he was asking became personal, weird, and inappropriate, enough for my coworker to then cut in. He looked at the guy and then at me, then said, "Rhea, go take your break," before he basically pushed me out of the way of the computer and rang the guy out. I stayed in the back until my manager came and got me, then telling me that it was safe to come out now. We were all pretty creeped out, and I really thought that was the end of it. A few days went by and we had almostly forgotten all about this creepy dude until he freaking walked in again. This time though, he didn't look through the store, didn't approach the counter, didn't say a word to anyone. He just stood there, jacket hood pulled over his head in the corner of the store, just staring and smiling. The smile had become even wider and more sinister looking, and at this point I had started to freak the hell out. I started shaking and feeling sick to my stomach. Then my manager cut the horrible tension by pretty much screaming at the guy, "Hey man, I'm sick of you coming into my store and pulling this crap." The creep paid no mind to him and just kept on staring. This pissed my manager off, and he walked out from around the corner and then told the dude, "Look man, if you don't quit coming in here and staring at her, I will not hesitate to call the cops. What you're doing is harassment, so you need to get the hell out of my store." At the mention of the police, this dude's smile totally dropped, and he then slowly ran out of the store. We never saw him again, but I was immediately taken off closing shifts due to the fear that the man would come back and try to catch me when I was alone. I definitely dealt with my fair share of creeps at that job, but this guy was by far the most disturbing. I was working in a large assisted living facility for a few years. I absolutely loved my job. I worked with the elderly mostly, but I had become a highly requested assistant and got moved around to the dementia ward, the short-term rehab ward, the stroke ward. You get the point. I was all over the place. Being a people person, I loved it. I liked going the extra mile in my job and getting to know my patients and their families on a more personal level. I felt like it made me a better CNA. It wasn't uncommon for me to be assigned to the more difficult patients because I could typically handle them no problem. It was a regular day. My charge nurse had mentioned that we would be getting a few new admits, and I didn't think much of it. Everything went routinely, and we got them all settled into their rooms and stuff. One patient in particular was already a handful and tried to escape a few times, so we needed to move him to the secured unit. I could hear him yelling and cussing out everyone, telling them they were idiots and that it was unnecessary to be doing all this. A few of the nurses suggested that I try to go calm him down, so of course I said yes. I put on my most charming smile and waltzed over to him asking what was wrong. He immediately took a liking to me and calmed down. He told me that nobody there knew how to do their job and he wanted some damn food already. I told him that dinner would be served soon and I'd make sure to bring his tray to him. He cooperated with everyone as long as I was around, and he took his meds, took a shower, settled into bed, no problem. Once my shift was over though, he had started acting up again, and he ended up needing one-on-one supervision. Different staff members would take turns monitoring him, and eventually I had to. It was an easy day's work. Get him an ice cream here and there, watch some TV. I didn't mind it at all. He told me about his life, and he asked about mine, mostly if I liked what I do and how come I never worked in the secured unit. I told him that I usually had my own group of patients in the front that I had to look after, but I'd make an effort to drop in and see him when I could. At first, the rest of the staff thought it was great. They would call for me if he started acting out, and everything was fine. But then he started getting a little too attached. He started saying that he wouldn't do anything unless I was there at all times, which of course I couldn't do since I was needed elsewhere. While I floated to different wards, the secured unit was one of the ones that I spent the least amount of time in. He started getting mad at me, saying that I needed to make more of an effort to see him, and that I wasn't trying hard enough. I explained to him that technically he wasn't my patient, and I couldn't spend my entire work shift just hanging out with him. That's when things started getting really bad. He started lashing out more, yelling and screaming at everyone. He was becoming violent with not only the staff but other patients. He was a liability. I had to drop something off in the secured unit one day, and one of the other CNAs told me he was asking for me. So I popped my head in and he started saying things like, "There's my girl." I felt uneasy, but I remained calm on the outside. If he was in a good mood, then I didn't want to be the one to ruin it for everyone else. He gave me a huge hug and kissed me on the cheek, immediately making me feel queasy. I kind of laughed it off and I got myself out of there as quickly as possible. After that, I avoided the secured unit at all costs. He started telling the nurses he only wanted me to take care of him, and when they said that wasn't possible because that wasn't my ward, he started going to my bosses and the heads of the facility, saying that he only wanted me to look after him. Luckily, my bosses had my back, and they told him that there was no way I could be assigned back there due to my high demand in the other wards. I was already running all over the place, and the secured unit was completely out of my way. He didn't like hearing that, and he started threatening everyone, saying they would be sorry and that this wasn't the end of that, and so on. My bosses called me into the office as soon as I walked into work the very next day and explained that I wasn't allowed anywhere near that wing and to avoid any contact with him. I had no problem with this and just went about my day. He would start banging on the doors to the secured unit, demanding to be let out and saying that he needed to see me. My anxiety was through the roof, and I had even called out a few times because I didn't want to see him. The facility was working fast to get him out of there because they had reason to believe that I could possibly be in danger with his violent behavior. On top of all that, it didn't help that some of the other staff members were whispering behind my back, saying that I had let this all happen and that I was always flirting with him and a bunch of other ugly things. Eventually, they got him discharged, and I felt a huge weight lifted off of my shoulders. Other than people still talking about me behind my back, I feel like I could get back to doing my job properly. I didn't let the negative and disgusting comments change the way I treated my patients with open arms and an open heart. Things finally started to go back to normal, or so I thought. On one of my days off, I got a call from my coworker. She told me that he had called the facility asking for me. She told him that I wasn't in for work that day, and he had started to ask for my schedule. I've dealt with someone stalking me before, so I immediately started to shut down. She told me that she had already informed our boss and that I should go to the heads of the facility when I came back to work the next day, so I did. I expressed my feelings and I told them that it made me nervous that he called for me, and the head of the facility's face just fell. She told me that it wasn't just the one time that he had called. They were receiving phone calls nonstop from him asking when I would be in, and that if they didn't tell him my schedule, he was going to go over there himself to find out. We had to make a plan of action in case he did show up, and they even suggested changing me to a different shift time because he knew that I worked mid-afternoon and evenings. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere by myself, and I had to be picked up and dropped off at work. While I waited for my ride, I had to wait inside the building and have someone escort me in and out. The calls continued, and finally they had to threaten legal action and had a huge meeting with the entire staff of the facility. I felt humiliated and small, knowing all the whispers and snide comments would come flooding back, but luckily I had more support than hate. The calls eventually started to slow down, and my true friends at work stood up for me when I wasn't there to defend myself to the people who didn't believe me. I started to get back into my normal routine once again and started feeling like my old perky self. One of my bosses called me into the office one day with a big smile on her face and told me, "It won't be bothering you anymore. He's in jail for violating parole." I was over the moon from hearing this. I felt like I could breathe again. My nightmare was finally coming to an end. A month or so later-ish, this was a while ago, so I can't remember exactly how long, but I was at work getting people ready for bed, and suddenly everyone started talking and whispering like crazy. My phone was ringing off the hook, so I finally took a call from one of my charge nurses. She told me that he had been murdered in jail and to check out the article she sent me. I learned he had an incredibly violent history, including child abuse and neglect, and other unspeakable things, such as domestic abuse, robbery, and a few other things. My bosses asked me how I was feeling, and I told them that I couldn't say that I was the least bit sad, and that I really wasn't surprised that his temper and mouth finally got him into some real trouble. I've left that facility since then, and moved on to bigger things, and I sleep soundly at night knowing someone like that can never bother me again. I'm not sure if him getting killed in prison was the karma he deserved, but it's what he got in the end. Hey everyone, that's about it for today's stories. If you have your own story that you would like to send, you can send it in at southerncannibal.com, or you can email it at southerncannibalstories@gmail.com. I look forward to telling your story. Have a good night or good day, everyone, and remember to always